Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Now before anyone just goes crazy, yes, I get it. The title of this video is a little clickbait, but if you stick with me, maybe you'll see that it's not quite as clickbait as you think. Is prepping going to save you? Well, of course not. Now, I know that there's going to be a lot of you that's going to say, only one that can save you is Jesus or Yeshua. You're right, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about spiritual preparedness. I agree with you, but that's a topic for another video. We're talking about, well, all the stuff that's going on in the world, and is being a prepper going to be the thing that saves you? I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm doing things that I can put earbuds in. If I'm mowing on a tractor, today I was moving all the electric fencing around. That takes usually a couple of hours. And so when I'm doing that kind of stuff, I'm listening to a podcast. And usually the podcast, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing them, because that's not it. But most of the podcasts I listen to, they're big names in kind of the alternative media, and they talk about a lot of the stuff that's going on, similar things that I talk about, and how it's all bad. And most of them have come around to the idea that we are experiencing a collapse. That's what we're into. We're into a collapse, not a collapse meaning that it's going to be Mad Max necessarily, although, I mean, that's always on the table. But a collapse where the whole system and probably the government will fall to pieces and will be quickly rebuilt as something new. I mean, in fact, that's what the World Economic Forum has been talking about. They've been talking about a reset. A reset isn't a remodel, okay? A reset is when you, zero something out and you start all over. And that is their plan. And if that, in fact, is what happens, is prepping alone going to be enough? And when I listen to a lot of these podcasts and they talk about this kind of stuff, every once in a while, they will say, yes, you need to be prepared. You should buy some of this emergency food. You should have some guns. You should have some water put away. But they don't really go much deeper than that. And I've been thinking about that as I listen to them, and all the things that they're talking about, generally I agree with. And they're very well researched, and there's a lot of solid evidence that they present to indicate that we are in a collapse, which is something that I tell you all the time, and many other channels like mine. But if that is the case, well, just having some food and stuff stuck away, and it doesn't even matter if it's the emergency freeze-dried food, or if it's store-bought canned food and beans and rice in buckets, or if it's just stuff that you've canned yourself out of your own garden, is that enough? Is having some firearms around, is that enough? Is being able to have some water stored away, maybe even a water filter, is that enough? My argument is no, it's not enough. Being a prepper alone is not going to be enough to protect you from the collapse that we are seeing happen. And I'm not going to go deep into the collapse. You can watch videos that I make every day talking about this kind of stuff. I want to focus specifically on how you can be prepared. Because if we experience the collapse that myself and many others are predicting, or at least saying that it's very possible to happen, then just having some food put away is probably not going to help you in the long run. I don't remember the name, but it was one of these prominent bankers, CEOs or something like that, of one of the big banks. It was several months ago, and he stated that he expected this economic downturn to last at least a decade. Now, I'm sure he wasn't referring to a complete collapse, but I think the timeline that he gave was probably pretty accurate. I think that we're probably looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of at least a 10-year period of a collapse, hitting rock bottom, and then trying to come up out of that. Now, of course, that does not factor in any kind of biblical end times timeline, and I'm only saying that because none of us really know that timeline. So putting that aside for just a moment, I think that we're in for it for the long haul. If you look historically, when nations and empires go through a major collapse, it takes a long time before they come back out of it. And I think that a lot of people don't quite realize how severe that's going to be. I've heard others say this, and I think they're correct in this. We're looking at something in the neighborhood of probably a pre-industrial existence for a while. And then, of course, we're only factoring in a government, political, and societal level collapse. We're not even at this point factoring in if all of these theories of pole shifting and solar micronovas and CMEs and all that kind of stuff even happen. I mean, we don't know. It looks like they're possibly going to happen, and if you aren't aware of those kind of things, you can go over to Suspicious Observers, and I'm not saying I fully support everything he says, but I'm pretty much everything he says. I think he's got some pretty good research and knowledge on it. But anyways, back to the prepping. Is prepping enough? No, of course not. Prepping, and especially when it kind of came about and became initially popularized, was initially meant to kind of be a band-aid on a bad time. You know, if there was a tornado, for instance, the fires in Maui, a hurricane, an earthquake, or, a cyclical economic downturn. What if you break your leg and you can't work for a few months? Those kind of things is where prepping comes into play. What we're experiencing is a total collapse. And if that happens, prepping alone is not going to be enough. If you take prepping and you extend it out to its fullest extent, you have self-sufficiency. And that really is where we need to be focused on. We need to be focused on being self-sufficient as much as possible. Now that's going to be difficult because we're into the third and fourth and maybe, even fifth generation, depending on what region and how you look at it, of being a nation of people that's become dependent upon the government, dependent upon technology, dependent upon systems and infrastructure like utilities, dependent upon a food source system, farming, modern farming, and modern grocery stores. We've become very dependent upon all of those things to the point that we do very little on our own, even down to the point of working on our own vehicles and fixing our own houses. I'm sure many of you are like myself and you do it yourself, but I'm speaking generally as a nation. We are very hyper-dependent people anymore. And because of that, that's going to be one of our biggest downfalls. To be able to make it through all of this, again, aside from spiritual salvation, I think the best thing and probably the most likely scenario that could save us from complete destruction is being self-sufficient. Being able to do without all that, because once it gets cut off, that's when the people run to whatever is available because they're desperate. They don't know how to exist. They don't know how to live. They're sick. They're hungry. Their children are sick and hungry. And they're scared because it's dangerous. And so they will run to these 15-minute smart cities and live in their little pods and eat their little bugs because that's all the choice that they have, really. You and I need to have a different choice. And that's why we have to be prepared in a self-sufficient way. Now, when I say this and I talk about this, a lot of people say, so you're wanting us to live like the Amish. Well, my initial response is if you can live like the Amish, you probably should, because that's going to definitely give you an edge over most people. But even if you're not living like the Amish, or even living off-grid with solar power and things like that, you should at least have the ability with the tools, the skills, and the mental fortitude to live that way if you have to. We need to be developing ourselves and our homes in a way that we are not tied in and dependent upon all of these systems that are very fragile. You need to be able to produce your own food. You need to know how to take care of that food, meaning you need to know how to preserve it and make it last. You need to know how to raise animals and take care of them, take care of their medical needs. You need to know how to process that animal and preserve it. You need to know how to maintain your farm, maintain your homestead, fix, repair things, whether it's machinery or the home itself. You need to know how to defend it. You need to know how to take care of illnesses and injuries along the way. You need to basically be like the original homesteaders of this nation, because when they went out west, most of them, especially initially, had no safety net whatsoever. There was no support for them. And some of them might have been lucky to make it into a trading station once a year, but a lot of them didn't even have that for a long time. And so we have to start thinking along those lines. Yes, it'll be in a modern sense. We'll have some modern technology, but it's quite possible that the only way for us to survive this and this is critical, survive this and not get drug in and sucked in to their FEMA camps and their 15-minute smart cities and their great reset control and beast system, one of the only ways that we may be able to avoid that is to just be able to be out on our own. Now, I know that many of you are going to say, yeah, but they'll come looking for you. It's possible, but there's certainly evidence indicating that they won't, or they may not everywhere, because they don't have the manpower. And it's going to take a lot of manpower and even a lot of technology to do that. 2016, I've said this many times, but 2016 Forbes magazine did an article about the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab's proposition for the Great Reset back before they were really calling it that. And he even said in that article that, because they asked him, well, what happens to the people that choose not to come live in these big smart cities? He said they'll be out in the wastelands on their own. They'll just be out in the wilderness. They'll be cut off from utility service. They'll be cut off from the supply chain. They'll be out on their own. This has actually been portrayed in a lot of TV shows and movies. In fact, one of them that I kind of think portrays it very well came out several years ago. It did have a cheesy side to it because I believe it was produced by the WB. And so about part of that TV show was silliness. But the other part portrayed, I think, what could be very accurate. It was a TV show called Revolution. And in that show, technology ceased to exist because of nanotechnology. And I'm not saying that I think that could happen, although it might. What it portrayed was after the initial collapse and the civil wars and the marauders and all that, it portrayed life in the future looking very similar to what it would have looked back in, say, the early 1800s, because that's all people had, and they were having to relearn, and the only ones that could survive were the ones that were out and away from the cities or had the ability and the knowledge to kind of live that way. That is where we need to be doing. That is the goal that we need to have. Not necessarily to live that way now, but to have the ability to live that way when it happens, if that's what's necessary. That is what's going to save us, not spiritually, but save us. And it's not how much stuff you have necessarily, or even necessarily how many rounds of ammunition you have. Those are tools, and they can certainly make things better. The food stored away is to help you in that transition period of going from normalcy to pre-industrial society where you're living solely off of what you produce. And then the guns and ammo are there in case bad things happen. And it's very possible that they will. You need to be able to do for yourself. And the best way to do for yourself is to do that with others. I mean, you can do that on your own as an individual or a family, but it's going to be hard. It really is. You can't stay awake all the time. You can't farm and take care of the animals and take care of the children and also defend your homestead all at the same time. So having a small community of people, a mag, a tribe, a crew, is going to make things a lot better for all of you. Now, I know many of you want that, but it's hard to find. And I keep telling you over and over again, don't give up. Keep pushing for it. Keep trying to find it. So many people that I've talked to have been trying this for years, and only recently they're starting to find others. And I believe that the Father in heaven is bringing his people together, calling his remnant together, and just keep trying. But I'm telling you, it's not just prepping alone that's going to take care of everything. We have to open our eyes and open our minds and realize that we have to put some real work into it. You know, if you had the money, some of you do, some of you don't, to just order 2 or 3 years food supply and have it stored away, that alone is not enough, folks. You need to have a bigger plan than that. And your plan needs to be that you're able to live in a pre-industrial lifestyle, have the tools, have the property, be away from the big cities, hopefully have others around you of like mind. and have the knowledge and the skill to know how to live that way. I know this sounds extreme, but when you start to see all the things happening right now in our world, and you play these events out to their full extent, it doesn't take too long to realize that it's quite possible that what we will be seeing in the future, and I'm not saying 2 months, 6 months, or it could be a few years to where it gets that bad, but if you, again, take it out to the fullest extent, we're watching our society and our civilization completely collapse. And if that does happen, it's going to be bad, and it's going to be something like we've never seen before. Go back and look in history and see what happens when massive civilizations crumble. A lot of it, especially the rural areas, are just kind of turned over to the wild. The big cities, they may still exist, but usually some dictator or something that exerts tyrannical control runs them. And then the wastelands, well, they're just wild. And I know it's dangerous. Freedom is scary and dangerous, but if your choices are figuring out how to survive in the wastelands or selling your soul to go live in the safe, secure, controlled, tyrannical cities, well, I'm going to choose the wastelands, and I'm going to figure out how to survive in them. And that's where I think a lot of you are going to be. But I'm telling you, just having some food stored away is not going to be enough. Don't just be a prepper. Work on being self-sufficient. Work on being a homesteader. Even if you're in the city right now, still consider yourself a homesteader. Not modern homesteader, but a homesteader like what existed 150 or so years ago. That's the kind of homesteader that we actually need to be. Someone that has the knowledge and skills and the ability to kind of live off the land without any safety net. Folks, now is the time to get your houses in order. It's time to prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.